Michelle Prince, founder and CEO of Performance Publishing Group, making a difference one story at a time. We'll be shining the light on successful founders, entrepreneurs, business owners, and leaders that are getting results and making a difference. We'll talk about how they built their businesses, are creating movements, and leveraging the power of authority in their own lives. Be sure to stick around to the end of the show, and we'll reveal how you can be our next guest. Let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Michelle Prince, host of the Power of Authority Spotlight, where we're shining the light on successful business owners, leaders, founders, and people who are just doing pretty awesome things in their businesses. They're creating movements and they're making a difference by leveraging their authority. And my guest today, you are going to be super excited to hear from because he knows a thing or two about podcasting. I'll just leave it at that. But first, this episode is brought to you by Performance Publishing Group. Performance Publishing Group provides top quality, comprehensive book publishing services for soon-to-be authors. The Performance Publishing team has helped thousands of people realize their dream of becoming an author, whether that be through our workshops, bookbound workshops, done for you publishing, and so much more. I'm just a big believer that everyone has a story and everyone should be telling their story. But as part of being a partner publisher, Performance Publishing Group can offer you more than just expert guidance. They want to make sure you get the book of your dreams and reap the rewards. So to learn more, just go to performancepublishinggroup.com. All right, let me tell you about my guest, Alex Sanfilippo, who is just a brilliant mind in the space of podcasting. And I've had a chance to get to know him over the last year or so. But he started his first business at the age of 10. He began selling used golf balls in his neighborhood and realized that he was an entrepreneur. Since that time, he's done a lot: real estate, technology startup, real estate investing, aerospace executive, blogging, public speaking, coaching, and finally, podcasting. Alex is the host of the top-rated podcast called Podcasting Made Simple. He's the founder of PodPros.com, a software company focused specifically on the podcasting industry. And Alex and his team have created a popular service like PodMatch, which is a service that matches podcast guests and their hosts together for interviews, and Podcast SOP, a project management tool that helps podcasters keep up with their episode releases. Man, that is a lot of stuff you're doing there, Alex. He is 100% podcasting, but he's also just 100% a great guy. And I'm really, really excited to have you on the show. So welcome.
Michelle, thank you so much for the warm introduction. Yeah, you said a lot about me there. Thank you. I don't really feel like I do that much because I'm not like a really busy person. But when you said it that way, I'm like, wow, that sounds like a lot.
That's impressive, right? Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, okay. So I met you through PodMatch, actually through Jennifer, who's on my team. You two connected, and then we love your service, PodMatch, and then we've done some other things in there. But before we dive into that, I really want to go back. I love to know the backstory. So you started at 10 as an entrepreneur, did a lot of different things. How on earth did you go from that to what you're doing today in podcasting?
Yeah, sure. I'll keep this story fairly brief. There's obviously a lot more involved, but at that young age, I just realized that I really liked sales. I liked putting together a team because I had all the kids in the neighborhood help me, right? Like we kind of built this little thing and I enjoyed it and I was good at it. It was probably the first thing, even at 10, which is maybe like a weird age to realize that you're good at something. But I realized, hey, I'm good at this. Like I like this. And I just kind of followed that all the way through. So I did all these different little startups and things like that and worked with different people along the way. And the opportunity came to actually get into the aerospace industry, which is it was a corporate job. But I always kind of had that mindset of an intrapreneur, which is like an entrepreneur, but in an organization, right? Kind of a newer term. That wasn't a thing back then. But basically, I just kind of showed up the way I would in my own business, but in an organization. It worked really well for me. I did 15 years in that industry. And when I first started, the company was a privately held, what we considered, it was a medium-sized business in the United States. And by the time I left 15 years later, it was a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar organization. And during that time, I worked from being a part-time receiving guy to a full-time executive at the company. And what made me decide to actually get out of that, I loved it. I'm going to say this disclaimer here. My best year at that company was my very last year there. Like I worked really hard because I'm a firm believer that the way you end one season is the way you're going to begin the next.
Ooh, I like that.
I think it's so important we do that. And it was great. Like this is kind of like a side tangent here. I don't mean to go on that already, but about a year after I left, they asked me to come back and speak at somebody's like going away party. It was like an older executive who was leaving. And that was cool for me. You know, like I left on good enough terms that they asked me to come back and speak to the organization. And that was really cool. Anyway, the reason I decided to get out of it is because one day I was really excited because one of my departments saved 10% on our bottom line. Like one of the departments, it wasn't like billions of dollars, but it was millions of dollars, right? It was a big deal.
Yeah.
And I felt like I didn't do this, but I felt like kicking my CEO, because that's who I report to. I felt like kicking his door in and like put my feet up on his desk. In my head, that's what I did. I didn't do that. But I walked in really excited to explain this to him. And he goes, "Yeah, I saw the report." I was like, "Did you notice we saved 10%? We didn't lose 10%." Because I could tell in his tone he wasn't happy about it. He goes, "Yeah, no, I know." He goes, "But the shareholders are furious." He goes, "Because we didn't tell them we were going to do something like that. And they could have been selling the stocks at more than we did." And I remember leaving that meeting. I didn't get in trouble or anything like that, but I realized that my time there had ended. I had
Hmm.
become more of a cog in the machine, if you will. And there's nothing wrong with that. It was a good, stable job, and I really enjoyed it. But I just realized I wasn't going to be able to be the entrepreneur I wanted. And to keep a long story really short, I decided to start a podcast to talk to people who had successfully left a 9 to 5 job to become an entrepreneur full time. And it was somewhat selfish, but at the same time, I went on that journey and took people with me. And my show, I just launched it at the right time. I mean, I
Yeah.
really just it just the stars kind of aligned. I did put a lot into it, so I wasn't like a bad host. Like I did a really good job, and the show just took off. And two things happened. One, I learned how to be an entrepreneur from these
Mhm.
people, right? But two, I realized where I wanted to be an entrepreneur was in the podcasting space. I mean, I fell
Mhm.
in love with the people that I was meeting in podcasting. I started speaking at all the conferences. I just knew that this is the area I wanted to be in. And that's what got me into podcasting full time. I started a software company, and the rest has kind of been history.
Wow. So what foresight did you have to know to get into podcasting? Because it does sound like it was way before it really, really took off. And how did you know to start there doing a podcast versus writing a book or doing something different?
The funny thing is, going back to that aerospace job, I remember I was going through the warehouse was like one of like the actual shipping for parts. And I should mention, I wasn't an astronaut, skydiver, or fighter pilot. Like nothing fun. Like I worked behind a computer, and we were part support for below the atmosphere is where we focus. So I was like in the warehouse. I went back there to check on my managers and stuff like that. And some of the guys were all talking about a podcast. I had never listened to a podcast. And I just kind of heard them talking. I always like to interact with
Yeah.
everybody. Like I try not to just be the guy who walks straight to the manager and ignores everyone else, right? Like I want to be
Right.
friends with all the people. So I'm like, "So what are you all listening to?" Because I could just hear somebody talking. I'm like, "Are you literally just listening to somebody talk?" And they're like, "Yeah, it's amazing." I'm like, "That sounds so stupid." Um, and then they're like, "Dude, just try it." And they gave me one, and I listened to it, and I learned something. And I was like, "Okay, this is cool." And so from then on, I started like finding shows I liked and started subscribing. So it gave me the idea to actually do a podcast, if you will, like
Mhm.
in the entrepreneurship space, was because I actually was listening and learning. I'm like, man, if I was behind the mic, I could ask questions that I'm actually
Yeah.
interested in. Because sometimes I'll listen to interviews. I'm like, "Could you please ask this question? Please ask this question." They
Mhm.
never get to it. I'm like, darn, that's what I really need to learn.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what opened me up to like, maybe I should just do this. And
Yes.
that was how I started. How I started that.
That is so cool. That is so cool. And it just came natural to you, it seems like,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, somewhat worked toward it, but yeah, I'd say it was somewhat natural. I had some experience speaking and stuff like that, so it maybe became a little bit easier. But I'm not going to lie and say I wasn't super nervous the first time I sat behind a mic to record, and
Yeah.
even more nervous the day I hit publish when people could hear it. So
Oh, yeah.
the last thing I want to do was share that with anybody. But I know that you know what,
Yeah.
being afraid. Sorry, courage means being afraid than doing what you have to do anyway.
I
And I knew it
love
was
that.
important for me to be courageous and just say, "Here it is, world." Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, day one, I was a little nervous for sure.
So, what do you think makes podcasting so popular? I mean, it is everyone's listening to podcasts. What is it about it that we are all just drawn to?
I think it's the fact that we are all very busy people. And I
Hmm.
say busy. We've got things that we all like to do, right? Like some of us it's go to the gym. Some of us it's keep our house really clean.
Yeah.
Regardless, we're all doing things, and it just fits really well with that, especially American lifestyle of, hey, we're always moving, we're always going,
Hmm.
because it's in your ears. You don't
Yeah.
need to also be holding a screen. You don't need to be sitting in front of a TV or anything like that, right? It's just in your ears. It follows you wherever you go. You can hit pause and start wherever you want. And the other beauty of it is it's not like I never watched Game of Thrones, but I can remember like when that was out, a lot of people I know they would watch it, but they come into work one day and they'd be like, "No one talk about it. I haven't seen it yet." And podcasting isn't like that. You can do it
No.
at your own pace. You don't feel like you're going to miss out because you haven't heard something. And so I think it just fits, especially and globally. It's really kind of becoming the standard because we're all becoming busier
Hmm.
as a human race. But America kind of driving that forward. This is where people just love to always be on the go. So it allows us to be a little bit ADD and also learn
Yeah.
and listen at the same time. I think
I
that's really the power of it. It's just a medium that is like accessible anywhere and where like whatever you're doing.
I totally agree. No, and I love podcasting. I always have. It's funny when I first started my business. I started in 2009. speaking. And then the publishing company came in 2010. And one of the things I did was I did a radio show. Now, back then, you were way too young to probably even know about this stuff, but it was
I'm not as young as I look. All right. Okay.
Okay, well, maybe we'll see. But it was a blog talk radio, or I can't remember, but it was an online talk radio show that basically, nobody's listening to, but you had a show. And so it was a lot of work. And every week I did a show, I'd have a guest, preparation, and all that. So when I ended that show, I was like, see ya, I'm out on that. And then when podcasting started, everybody's like, oh, you need to have a podcast. You need to have a podcast. I'm like, oh, no. I've done that before. And I hesitated for a long time. Now, I was guest on shows a lot. I used to co-host the Ziegler Show with Kevin Miller once a month. I'd do a Q&A call with him. And so it was fun. I love to do it, but I was like, I am not doing my own show. Well, famous last words. Literally right before COVID hit, I started my show. It was called The Power of Authority at that point. And I intentionally wanted to do it in a studio because I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it different. And I don't want to do a show. Like, I want people to come to the studio. We're going to make it interactive. And literally we recorded like 6 episodes, and then COVID hit. So it's like, okay, well, that didn't go over so well.
Right.
There's no meeting in a studio anymore. So it was tabled for a little while. And then about a year or so ago, we brought it back as the Power of Authority Spotlight, which is what this show is. And it's really because I was and I really am fascinated by people that have a desire to have a business, grow a business, but have a bigger mission behind it, And so now I'm on the other side of it. And I'm like, podcasting, aside from book writing, which is I'm big passionate about, I tell everybody you have to have a podcast. And that's what I want to dive into today, because I think everyone, and we've talked about it a little bit before too, the benefit of being a guest is huge. And I definitely have benefited from being on some shows, but there's another side, and one that I really want to see more people take advantage of, and that's have your own show. So can we talk about that?
Yeah, I would love that. And real quick, okay. I'm going to call out a past episode of your show real quick, because I just recently listened to it and I thought it was really well done. It was back from August 8th. And it was with Eric Jensen. And you talked about building authority through podcast guesting. And because we're not going to talk about that today, I do recommend anybody hearing this episode who has not already heard that one, go back and listen to that. It's the Power of Authority Spotlight. Just go back to August 8th is when it was. Eric Jensen. Really good. It's the opposite side of what we're talking about today. So I just want to call that out. Michelle, I'll pass it back over to you.
Yes, no, thank you. Yeah, because there's two different reasons. I mean, there's a reason to do both, right? Where I feel like people should really consider having their own show are ones that they are wanting to be a thought leader. We help people write books. We help people to tell their story and build their platform. So if you're in the category of wanting to have any sort of platform, podcast is one of the best ways to do it, because it's an immediate authority. You're a podcast host, but it's also consistently tying into your branding, your message. And I just think it's an opportunity to get, like, if you really are passionate about your book message, then put it into a podcast, and it can go and go and go. But I really want your take on this, because you're the expert.
Yeah. So I'll give you a story to start this off, to kind of reinforce what we're talking about here. Not long ago, I was looking into doing some SMS marketing, which is text message marketing, basically, right? Sending it directly to people's phones. And I looked up companies on Google. So I just did like a search engine, like looking around. I found a few companies. And then the next thing I did is I opened up my podcast app, opened it up, and typed in SMS marketing. I found one of those companies I was looking at had a podcast. Only one. The rest of them didn't. I listened to that, liked it so much. That's the product that I bought. And then I was just curious. I'm like, well, I bought it because they started teaching me something through a podcast, which clearly established them as the authority. Let me see how their pricing actually lined up. They were the most expensive of the 3 that I picked out. And I didn't have any buyer's remorse on that. I still know I made the right choice. It's because they positioned themselves as an authority and were helping me out through their own content in the way that I like to receive it. So it wasn't like, oh, we got a whole help menu. No, it wasn't that. It was, no, I like podcasting. They met me where I was at. I was willing to pay more to work with somebody that I felt like was going to continuously invest in my education, not just of their product, but the idea of SMS marketing in general. And so that right there kind of embodies, in my mind, the power of podcasting. That is
the perfect story example. I love that. And it's funny. I have a texting piece of my business as well. And I looked into all of those, and it never even occurred to me to do that. But you're right. If a business or a brand is going to put all the effort to do a podcast, to me, that says, okay, then you legitimately have a great place in the marketplace and great content and things like that. So, but that's a perception, right? You and I have been on the other side of this to know it is work to put on a podcast, but it's not like you don't have to be at this elevated level in order to be a host. Or do you disagree?
No, you really don't. I mean, you talked about doing the recording studio and stuff like that. And like maybe years ago, that was kind of like the standard because of just what we've seen from traditional radio and TV. But now podcasting is its own thing. And I remember even like, let's just go back. You talked about 2019 being when you started, then 2020 happened, right? Before that, even with podcasting, people wanted to edit out every little thing. I heard a dog bark in the background. Can you remove that? And now people don't edit that out anymore because it feels more human. And people now are just like, just show me that you're a real person. Like, please.
Yes.
And like example, I interviewed Pat Flynn yesterday and his dog started barking and we just laughed about it. I'm like, I'm not even going to edit that out. And I'm not even going to edit out me saying I'm not going to edit that out. I'm going to leave it because it feels more human. So yes, you can go like over the Hollywood production side of it. You're going to spend a fortune and maybe your company can afford that. And maybe that's the reputation that you want. Or you can get a human vibe, which I think is better because I work in software. Any chance I get to throw in a little bit of an issue, not in the software, obviously, but like people hear me stutter a little bit, or I'm like, oh, oops, I didn't mean to say that. What I meant was this. Like those type of things make it feel human. We live in a more and more robotic world. And in my mind, the best podcasts are the ones that you can tell, you know what? Michelle is a real person.
Yes.
I listen to Power of Authority Spotlight because she has people like Jim Palmer on who just shares like his story completely authentically, right? Like, like you can just that to me makes more sense. So to answer your question in a very long way, I think that just having a real human be part of it and do your best to do a good job. Like, don't sit in your car and do it through your phone, right? Like, cars honking around you. Like, have some pride in what you do, but don't feel like you need to break the bank to do it.
I love that you said authenticity because that's really important to me as a speaker and a writer, right? And I always would tell people, look, who do you relate to more? The most perfect speaker that's on the stage with their hand at exactly the right spot and, perfectly polished, or somebody who's like, look, I don't have it all together, but I'm working on it. And I'm going to share with you what I've learned so far. We connect to real people. And I think maybe that's why, going back to the question I asked you before, why is podcasting such a huge movement now? And maybe it is because, social posts, those can be orchestrated. Video production, orchestrated, right? To be perfect. But a podcast, if you're just talking to somebody, having an authentic conversation, I just think that you can just connect with somebody in a different way.
Feels like real life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm with you. I think that's really the key element that we have to be able to get as podcast host. And if I could drive into a little bit of a different point here, Michelle, that I think goes well with that is you have to know why you're doing it. So you can't just in general say like, I've got a podcast, we're just gonna have great conversation. No, if yours is about SMS marketing, like let's just say, or being like your book specifically, then make sure the conversations flow really well with that. The best way to do that is before you launch, or if you've already launched at any point, stop and just sit back and say, what is my why for doing this? Like, what is the purpose? And then immediately as you build the purpose, go to your ideal listener. So not somebody make a fictitious character. This is your avatar and say, okay, here's my why. What does the ideal listener look like of that? And then you weigh every piece of content against that person. So for me, I have Adam. That's his name. I have a whole backstory of Adam. He's in his mid 30s. He works out a lot. He works a lot. And he listens to podcasts while he's in the gym. Like that's when he's doing that, or while he's out kicking the soccer ball. Like that's when he listens, but he wants to listen to learn to grow his online software business. Like that's what he's looking to do, right? Build an avatar like that that's connected to your why. And then before you even record, say, you know what? Me and Michelle are going to record today. Would Adam get value from the conversation that we're planning on having? If the answer is no, because it doesn't align with your why, then don't do it. But I find one big problem in podcasting and why some people who actually at least stay consistent, which is the number one metric for success in podcasting, is consistently releasing content. So little side note for everybody there, but it's very important. Stay consistent. But if you stay consistent, you have 300 episodes, but you feel like you still have no traction, it's because you don't have a powerful why behind it. You've not stayed true to that. In my mind, the best way to do this is say, you know what? In 12 months from now, if I do an episode every week, let's just say, or every other week, whatever you're going to commit to, stay consistent with it. But say in 12 months from now, what do I want my avatar to have learned or grown in that time period? Where do I want them to have gone on this journey? And if you're like, I don't really know what they would have gotten from this, then maybe you're doing it for the wrong reason, or maybe you don't have a powerful enough why. And I think that if we can really get that done right, keeping the human element involved, but having that really focused niche that we want to be in, that's what makes a really powerful show.
That's so awesome. That's great information. Okay, let me ask you, because you work with a lot, or you've seen a lot of shows, you've worked with a lot of shows. What makes one podcast better than the other? Like from what your experience, and if you have any examples that you're able to share too.
Yeah, sure. I'll actually call out a really big podcast. It's very well known. I typically like to call out the little niche ones, but there's one that always comes to mind, someone who just does it really right. And it's because this guy has hundreds of episodes. He releases them every, I think it's Monday and Friday or Tuesday and Friday or something, but twice a week, and he never misses it. And he just does a really good job keeping the conversation really interesting. It's called the Jordan Harbinger Show. Jordan Harbinger has like 15 million people listen to his podcast every month or something crazy like that. But he just does such a good job. Like, I know, hey, you know what? He's got an episode out and it's Tuesday. So I don't know if it comes out Monday or Tuesday, but that's when I listen to podcasts. So I bust it out. I know there's gonna be a new one from him. And I know that it's going to be good because he's developed that trust with me and apparently 15 million other people that just know this is going to be really good, because that is how he's consistently shown up. And it's his is more general, but he's been able to build to that. On the flip side, I listen to some smaller niche podcasts that just do it really well because they deliver on the promise that they make. So like the show title, the description, what the introduction says, if it doesn't deliver on that, then most people are gonna be like, oh, I'm not really learning what I expected to learn. I've got to go. And so that's what really makes a good show. So Jordan Harbinger Show is kind of like the golden standard, I'd say, but there are literally hundreds of shows that I love that I just think people that get it really right.
So I checked out Jordan's show because, when we were in that, your program as guests a couple months ago. So I was checking him out, and yeah, you're absolutely right. He does a phenomenal job of great content, consistency. And I do think that is the key. And it's one of the hardest things, I will say, as an entrepreneur, because if anyone listening is like me, I mean, there's just always like something else to do. And so consistency is hard sometimes, but it is key, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think that something that helps with that is commit to a set amount of time. So for me, I committed to doing 50 episodes in 1 year when I launched my show, and I was not going to let myself stop. So I just started batching as many of them as I could. I do like 12 at a time and just try to be like, okay, basically just get through them. And now I actually have like teams that help me do it. And if you have a business along with what you're doing, I encourage you at least hire somebody to edit, unless you just love it. Michelle, I know that you have someone who edits for you. I have someone who edits for me. That's a calling. Let's put it that way.
Best money you'll ever spend.
Yes, exactly. And my podcast editor, super affordable, comes from the music industry. He is brilliant, like the best of the best. I can't do it as good as he can, and he needs almost no direction. I just give it to him. And so people are like, oh, but it's so much work to podcast consistently. If you're saying that, one, is it worth it? And if you say no, it's not, then don't even start. It's like, don't do that. But if you say yes, it is, but it's still so much work, then find the gaps of where you can basically say, I need to stay focused on my core business, like where I build my authority, right? My authority is not being built by me editing a podcast, unless that's the industry you're in, right? Pass that off. Be willing to invest in yourself so that you have that mental capacity, so you can keep yourself in the right frame, so you can say, hey, I can continue to grow my authority.
Yes. And if you don't like people, you're probably not going to be a good podcast host. So
probably not.
You have to, like, I love these conversations, like that. I get more from even the side conversations after or before the podcast than the actual podcast, because just getting to know people as human beings, and we're all more alike than we are different. And I love that about podcasting, that you get to do that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Make sure that you really like people. Consider a solo cast if you don't. There's nothing wrong with non-interviews. You can do it by yourself if that's a better fit for you, but people can hear if you don't really like them. So just be careful, right?
So true. Okay, so people are thinking right now, like, okay, I'm convinced I need to do something. What is the best next step for somebody interested in starting their own show?
Yeah. So as we already talked about, kind of recap a little bit, make sure that you first off commit to a schedule. You say, I'm going to do monthly, weekly, whatever. I can say this from the data, the analytics show across the board in podcasting, weekly is the best for your show. So that's really the best spot, but there's no right or wrong answer. Just stay consistent with whatever you commit to. Next thing is really develop that why, build that avatar. And the next thing you want to do is actually start recording content. So you want to actually get behind a mic. And if you're like, well, I don't know what to get, start with what you have. Here's the thing. If you're using like a new MacBook or like a MacBook Pro or a Windows computer, most of them have good enough mics built in, or you can plug something in, use earbuds that have like a little mic built into them. That's a great way to start. People are not going to be like, oh, but the quality isn't Hollywood status. I can't listen to this. Like, anyone who says that isn't going to like your podcast anyway. I'm just going to tell you that. So just start with what you have, but start getting some content out there. It's all about getting the reps. I can tell you this, your episode 1 will not be as good as your episode 2. Your episode 2 won't be as good as your episode 3, your episode 4, 5, and so on and so forth, right? Like, Michelle, you and we're pretty far in at this point. If we went back and listened to what we originally did, we'd be like, ooh, this isn't that great,
Painful.
right? But the
Yeah.
truth is, it served somebody at that point. So that's why I always tell people, just get started.
That's
So
right.
once you've recorded some stuff, though, the next thing you need to do is just go to a hosting provider. You can type in podcast hosting. Go to Google. I prefer Buzzsprout as the company I use. I'm not affiliated with them or anything like that. That's just who I use. And basically, you're going to upload that audio, and then they're going to help you get it on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google. They kind of handle all that. There's not a lot of technical stuff involved in podcasting anymore. Michelle, when we got started, even just a few years ago, there was a lot more involved. Like, you had to do all these, like, you had to dance through all kinds of things to figure it out. You don't really have to do that anymore. It's very easy. And it'll automatically, it's called syndication. It's just going to go to all these different directories. Literally, people can listen in thousands of places by a push of a button that you only have to do one time. And then anytime you upload that hosting provider, it'll automatically go. And then there you go. You have a podcast. Now, I made that really simple, but it's not hard to figure out how to do this stuff, especially if you just find a good hosting provider. They'll help. They'll literally have staff that will walk you through all of it. What's important is that, again, you get that why right and you start recording as soon as you can.
Yeah. So what I love about you, you are a giver. You love to serve. You came onto the show just to serve. And I so appreciate that. But how can you help them? Like, what is it that PodMatch does? Or what are some, talk about your business and what somebody could benefit from you.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I appreciate that. So everything I do is at podpros.com. You can see all of our products and services. You mentioned PodMatch, and that's a service that automatically connects guests and hosts for interviews. Works very similar to a dating app, but instead of connecting people for dates, it connects people for podcast interviews. Uses an algorithm, kind of helps you figure that out. So if you're saying, well, I want to do interviews, Alex, but I don't know how to find guests, there you go. It's going to help you do that by you putting in who you're looking for. It will automatically match you those people. If you're like, this sounds like a lot to manage, we have podcastsop.com, which stands for standard operating procedures. It's literally a project management software just for podcasters. You don't have to learn anything new. It's really simple. But really, like, those are some tools that we have, but there are tons of tools out there. But that's a little bit about what I'm doing right now to serve podcasting. And if I could give one call to action, though, it's actually, I had Michelle on my podcast. She spoke at my virtual event. If you go to podpros.com/178, it's Michelle talking about how you can speak in sound bites, which is good for podcast guests or podcast hosts. And I highly recommend everyone go check that out. I think it's like 12 minutes or something like that, but it is brilliant. It's something I need to go back and listen to on a regular basis, but I always tell people, hey, we're really long-winded and shorter episodes seem to do a little bit better. So go check that out. But anyway, I appreciate you giving me the mic for a minute, Michelle. Thank you for that.
Of course. No, you've brought a ton of value to me, to my company, our team. And so I'm more than happy. And I really legitimately do believe in what you're doing. And I do believe in podcasting. And it excites me, and I'm really excited about podcasting. So, gosh, I could talk to you all day. I really could, but let's just wrap this up with, what's been the biggest impactful moment, and it could be anything, since you started your podcasting journey. What is one thing that you're like, gosh, this never would have happened had I not ventured out and started my own podcast?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things that come to mind. I'll share one though. I was in the middle of a really hard editing day because I used to edit my own podcast, which, again, I do not recommend. Don't do it. Just don't. And I finished the day and I logged on to social media because I was like, I'm done. I need a break. And I had a message from somebody. And I read this message and it almost brought tears to my eyes, because she said, Alex, I've been listening to your podcast. I found it midway through, like 100 episodes in. I went back and binged all of it. And she said, it's what finally gave me the courage to leave a verbally abusive business company I've been working for. Like, the boss had been verbally abusing her. And she's like, and I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. This gave me the courage to finally step out and do what I needed to do. And this was like weeks after. And she's like, and I'm already seeing more success from doing this now. And man, that to me was like, you know what? I'm a firm believer in doing for one person what you wish you could do for everybody. And I'm never going to help everybody, but I really helped that one person believe I changed the trajectory of her life and her business. And that to me I could podcast the rest of my life just from that one story.
Oh my gosh. I love that. And it kind of ties into perfectly with the show. It's like, you don't do a podcast because you want to be a podcast host. You don't write a book because you want to be an author. You do it because the content has a bigger purpose. And it's your authority is what makes other people want to listen to what you want to have to say. So but it helps make a difference. That's how we make a difference in people's lives, sharing our stories.
100%. I couldn't agree with you anymore.
Awesome. Well, you are awesome. And thank you so much for being on the show. I will definitely have you back on again if you're willing.
Of course. No, I love this, Michelle. Thank you so much. And everyone, thanks for listening. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, that's it for the show today, but I really, really want you to go to Podmatch, check them out, or, podpros.com, see what they can do for you, because truly a podcast is one of the best ways outside of a book that if you are passionate about your topic, that you have something within you that could help someone personally or professionally. It's your responsibility, in my opinion, to get it out there in a bigger way. So we'll see you next time. Make it a great day. Thanks so much for listening to the Power of Authority Spotlight. If you are a successful founder, entrepreneur, business owner, or leader that's getting results and making a difference, and you'd like to be on this program, please visit performancepublishinggroup.com/podcast to apply. That's performancepublishinggroup.com/podcast. Also, if you got something out of this interview, please share this episode. Just do a quick screenshot with your phone and text it to a friend or post it on the socials. If you know someone that would be a great guest, tag them on social media to let them know about the show and include the hashtag #ThePowerOfAuthoritySpotlight. I love seeing your posts and guest suggestions. We are regularly putting out new episodes and content, so make sure you don't miss any episodes by subscribing. Your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show and mean a lot to me and my team. Want to know more? Go to our websites, performancepublishinggroup.com or michelleprince.com, and follow me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.